Hey everybody, Aaron Kowalski here. Just getting going. We're going to wait for folks to gather for a minute. Looking forward to the discussion. Breakthrough T1D ADA recap. For a minute. Looking forward to the discussion. Oh, there I am. Hey everybody, Aaron Kowalski here, CEO of Breakthrough T1D. We'll get started in a second. Allow folks to log on. Just going to get started in a minute. We're going to do a recap of what we heard at the American Diabetes Association's scientific sessions. I see one of my longtime amazing research friend log on, Dr. Mark Atkinson. Mark, hopefully you have some good nuggets that you can throw in the chat. Give it one more minute and we can get started here. Everybody, if you're just logging on, Aaron Kowalski here, CEO of Breakthrough T1D. I'm going to do the next hour recap what we heard at the American Diabetes Association's scientific sessions, which is the biggest diabetes meeting of the year. And there was a lot of really just great updates. Thanks, Mark. Good to see you. Dr. Atkinson, an amazing scientist and friend and researcher from the University of Florida. Excellent. Well, Brian, why don't we get started? I have our good friend and colleague, Brian Herrick, running the slides for me here. Again, Dr. Aaron Kowalski, CEO of Breakthrough T1D. We're going to talk about the report outs at the American Diabetes Association scientific sessions. And this is a fantastic meeting. It happens every year, bounces around the United States. This year it was in Chicago. I think Mark told me there were over 12,000 people at this meeting. It includes scientists, company people, doctors, you name it, investors, all sorts from all different backgrounds, going over the latest and greatest in diabetes. We, Breakthrough T1D, had our team of scientists and health policy folks and medical affairs folks. I think this was maybe my 21st ADA Sci sessions. Really, it's always just a great vehicle to hear what's going on and meet with people and really talk about how to move the ball downfield as we drive towards cures for type 1. So today I'll give an update, and folks, please just chat. I'm watching the chat. You can throw questions for me. I'm happy to try to get to them as they come over. And yeah, let's go, Brian. So we'll talk about the first area. So Breakthrough T1D was founded back in the early 1970s to try to accelerate cures for type 1 diabetes. And I know everybody on here who has a type 1 loved one has been promised cures are right around the corner for a long time. And I'll say my brother and I have type 1, 2 of 6 in our family. 2 kids out of 6 have type 1 diabetes. And I've certainly am sensitive to making sure when we talk about cures, we're very specific and we're very realistic. But I will say I am as optimistic as I've ever been and let's talk about why. So if you go to the next slide. So hopefully, if you've heard me talk or follow us online, you've heard about what Vertex is doing, a program that was initially called VX-880. It's now called Zymlacel, and it's a clinical trial testing what we call manufactured islets. So just to take a step back, islets are the parts of your pancreas, clusters of cells that make insulin and the other hormones that you normally think about when you talk about diabetes, namely glucagon. Some of you may have heard of the hormone amylin, somatostatin. There are a variety of different hormones that help us maintain our blood sugars, and they're contained in these islets, these clusters of cell in your pancreas. Well, what Vertex has been doing, and this is really piggybacking on many, many years of research, is can we take cells that you can manufacture and make them into islets, like the human body loses, at least the beta cells of the islet, when we get type 1 diabetes. So this has been, again, many, many years of research for Vertex. It started in the lab of Doug Melton at Harvard. Dr. Melton has 2 children with type 1 diabetes. And his pursuit over the last 25 years is to create a renewable cell source of islets that potentially could cure type 1. Well, here we had a huge report out from Vertex. Vertex talked about the first 12 patients in a clinical trial testing this therapy in type 1 people. These were type 1 people who had severe hypoglycemia challenges. They needed to have a number of severe hypos over the last year before enrolling in this trial. That was the criteria for, or a main criteria for inclusion. And then they got an infusion of these cells. So just to be very specific, these cells are infused into a vein, and the cells then end up in your liver, which is very similar to what happens if you have read about what we used to call cadaveric islet transplants from somebody who died and donated their pancreas. And those cells settle in your liver. These people needed immunosuppression because they aren't, well, there's kind of 2 problems here. They're not your own cells, and you have autoimmunity, hence the trial. But the report out was really just fantastic. You'll see 10 out of the 12 patients in this trial, the first cohort of the trial, have significantly reduced or no insulin requirements, which was amazing. So these people, in their minds, are cured of their diabetes. Again, they're trading the diabetes for their immunosuppressant. And this is something that we've been working on for a long time, starting with the then JDRF, now Breakthrough T1D. Our venture fund invested in a spin-out company from Harvard called Semma, named after Dr. Melton's kids. And now it's at Vertex. So this trial will recruit 50 people, and we expect will be done next year. So that means the FDA submission for potential approval will happen next year. This is a scalable, curative therapy. I see Juan asking about alternative immunosuppression or gene-modified cells. Very, very high on the list for us at Breakthrough T1D, Vertex, and all the companies in this space to reduce or remove the need for immunosuppression. But I will say this is a massive step forward. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine and is super, super exciting. So more to come here. If you go forward, please. But yeah, to Juan, your question, we are working with other companies. It's not just Vertex that's working in this space. There are multiple companies working on cell therapies. In fact, this is our #1 priority at Breakthrough T1D. This is why we exist, is to cure type 1. Of course, we're going to help people until we get there, and I'll talk about that. But driving towards an immunosuppression-free stem cell-derived islet therapy is kind of the holy grail. Well, Sana Biotechnologies also had a really important report out using, now this is a donor-derived cell line. It's not a stem cell-derived cell line. So, of course, we want to see Sana move in that direction. but their focus has been on the need for immunosuppression. And in their report out, they have now 6 months of their first patient who was implanted with cells actually in the muscle of the forearm and now has insulin production where they didn't before. And they were C-peptide negative when they came into the trial. They have insulin production above the basal rate when stimulated by a meal, which suggests that these cells are functioning properly and the cells aren't being rejected. And that is a major milestone. These are not this person's cells, and this person has type 1 diabetes. So we call it the type 1 part autoimmunity, the not your own cells alloimmunity, and their approach is for 6 months now protecting these cells. So our fund has invested in this therapy. We're working closely with the team at Sana to see how to accelerate their work and see this move into a stem cell line and then hopefully move as quickly as possible towards the market. So super exciting. Everybody's on pins and needles around this. More to come. It's only one person so far. The animal data is also really interesting. And by the way, just a little nugget on how they do this. They're doing it with gene editing, which again, I'm pointing out Juan, who's asked a few questions here. They're using pregnancy science, which is really interesting because, of course, we all know that we came from our parents, and yet we grew up in the womb with DNA from our fathers. And that is a really interesting biological paradox because normally those cells that aren't the mom's cells would be rejected if we took skin from the father and sewed it onto the mom. And these are experiments that have been done in animals. You see quick, very rapid rejection. Yet here we are as people. We've come, we're born, and the biology behind this is something Sana is leveraging to use their immunoprotective strategy, which they talked about at the conference, which is really interesting. So more to come on this front. I see Juan, I'm just going to, the questions that you're asking about, are they going to continue on cadaveric or go straight to stem cells? They talked about moving to stem cell. I don't know if they've spoken publicly about how much they're going to pursue cadaveric islets, but you can imagine the scalability. We need to be in a manufactured cell approach to get this to be scalable for the broad population of type 1, and that's what we're focused on at Breakthrough T1D. So if we go forward. Now, the science of doing this is really complicated. It's taken 25 plus years, but a new area of science that we're really working on with all of the industry is how do you scale these cells up? And we have this amazing program going on with a group called ARMY, which stands for, it's probably hard to see there, the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute, amazingly run by a very famous and wonderful inventor named Dean Kamen. Some of you on the call may recognize that name. Dean Kamen invented the first insulin pump and actually just came out with a new pump called the Twist, with a sequel. But one of his other areas of focus lately has been tissue manufacturing for a variety of different areas where we need to scalably manufacture either cells or tissues to help heal people. And ARMY is working with us on producing islets, manufactured islets at scale. It's actually an incredibly complicated problem. Imagine making insulin. That's a really complicated process. This is making living cells that need to be transported and then transplanted in the type 1 people. So this is complicated, incredibly complicated manufacturing science. And we've been working with ARMY on the science of manufacturing islets, as well as creating a source of islets for other researchers who want to help us solve the problem of immunosuppression. So this is a really cool piece that maybe you haven't heard about, but is incredible science happening in Manchester, New Hampshire, where Dean's company DECA resides. And it's just, I'm blown away every time I go there and see it. It's absolutely amazing. Go forward here. So when we talk about what's needed and where do we need to go, it's really about implanting the cells, keeping them happy, and protecting them from the immune system. And that's a major part of this initiative at Breakthrough T1D. We call it Project ACT, which stands for Accelerating Cell Therapies. You'll be hearing a lot about this. And it's looking at what are the strategies to keep these cells happy and safe within our bodies. Remember, these cells sit in the pancreas in a 3D structure. They don't sit in the bottom of a petri dish. They're in a 3D structure, and that's important for their functionality. So another piece of the work that we're doing is looking at how do we make sure when these cells get into the body that they're in the right place, they get the right amount of blood and oxygen and nutrients. And this is another area that continues to be a focus of ours, because we need these cells to survive and survive a long time. We don't want to continue to have to get transplants. So that's another area of major focus for us. Go forward. So I'm going to pivot. And again, people, you can ask questions, and I'm sure we'll come back at the end to talk about different areas. But until we have cures, we want to keep people healthy and happy and ease the burden of diabetes management. I was on a call earlier today, and despite using all the most modern technology and thinking I know pretty well what I'm doing, I've lived with type 1 for over 40 years. I was up in the middle of the night last night having a snack because my blood sugar was super low. That's not fun. I was awake for a while. Yeah, I felt terrible this morning. We need to continue to push on new tools and technologies. We've made amazing advances. My family goes back to urine glucose testing and animal insulin. So the progress is great, but we're not satisfied with where we are. So if you go forward, Brian, there are a lot of different things we're doing. One is on these adjunctive therapies. So forever we've used insulin as the sole treatment for type 1. There was a treatment called pramlintide, amylin, that's not really used widely now. So what about these GLPs? And there's a lot of scuttlebutt about GLPs, Ozempics, Mounjaros of the world. Some people think they're, I hate to say, vanity drugs. I'll tell you, myself and our team feel very strongly that these are very important drugs for type 2 diabetes, but also for type 1 diabetes. And the reason is they can help on a number of different fronts. Blood sugar control, of course, we know they help with weight loss. They're approved for weight loss. The type 1 weight curve in America is very similar to the non-type 1 weight curve in America. So we have many people who are overweight and struggling with weight. Anybody who's had challenges with weight knows that when you put on weight, it causes insulin resistance. Even if you're type 1, makes it managing your diabetes harder. So GLPs and what we would call adjunctive therapies are a very important thing that we've been looking at to try to help the companies see that people with type 1 diabetes should have access to these drugs. And we know that they can help reduce insulin, reduce weight, and have been demonstrated to be safe in many people, particularly in type 2. So if you go forward, we've seen some report outs now in the type 1 population. In this case, type 1 people who are obese and using AID systems, automated insulin delivery systems, using Ozempic and looking at glucose control and weight. And what you'll see here is that these were powerful drugs to help people get higher time in range, reduce their weight, and showed that they were safe in type 1. One of the issues that the companies have wrestled with was, will these cause an increase in hypoglycemia? And what these studies are demonstrating that the answer thus far has been no. And it might seem now obvious that when you take less insulin, your risk of hypo goes down. But there was a worry of the interaction between these drugs and people who do use insulin. So we've been funding work in this space. I will say the other thing that Sanjoy, Dr. Duda on our team and the team would say is another knock-on benefit of these drugs has been their role in diabetic complications and reducing the risk of diabetic complications. So maybe if we go forward, before I get to this slide and talk about, that's another area. People on Ozempic and Mounjaro and GLPs and also SGLT inhibitors do have reduced risk of cardiovascular events. And these are heart events like heart attacks and strokes. And that's another benefit that we want people with type 1 diabetes to have. So that's a big fight for us, is to get GLP and SGLT drugs labeled for people with type 1 diabetes. Now, this is a cool one. VTV Therapeutics, funded by the fund, an area that the foundation and the fund have been working on for a number of years. Again, think about insulin. What it does, it helps your body take up the sugar from your bloodstream to fuel your cells. And that, for the last 100 plus years, has been our lifeline. But what if there were other ways to help take up sugar? And glucokinases are enzymes that also work in a different way than insulin to help turn over glucose. And in this case, VTV is working on a therapy that would leverage this mechanism. You see, it's got an acronym still. TTP 399 is their drug, a glucose kinase activator. And what they've shown is improved blood sugar levels, less hypo. It's an insulin independent mechanism, which is really appealing to us. So you can turn over glucose without having that insulin continuing to drive your blood sugar down too low. So this is really exciting, different mechanism, and part of our venture fund at the T1D fund. More to come soon. So glucagon, we're throwing a lot of science at you here. I'll try to explain. Glucagon receptor antagonist for glycemic control. What that means, glucagon, everybody here who lives with type 1 knows glucagon. You probably have glucagon kits. Hopefully now new, more modern kits than the old solubilization Lilly kit. But what glucagon receptor antagonists are trying to do is reduce glucagon secretion. So this is, again, get a little complicated, but most people with type 1 think that you don't have glucagon anymore, but you actually do. It's just not regulated properly. And these drugs are looking at, could we help regulate our systems, which get kind of out of whack when you don't have insulin around, because normally in the islets, insulin cells, the beta cells, are talking to the alpha cells. And normally it's a very elegant discussion that helps the blood sugar stay normal. When you pull that away, you get imbalance. And of course, we try to balance it with insulin, but we know that's not enough. So here, this trial is looking at this drug in addition to an SGLT inhibitor. So these are the drugs that cause you to pee out more sugar that are approved in type 2 diabetes. And the beauty of this combination is it allows for the use of SGLT inhibitors without increased diabetic ketoacidosis risk, which is a big worry for us with the use of those drugs. So also with these drugs, SGLT inhibitors, we see a cardiovascular benefit, and hence our desire to see these drugs be approved for type 1 people. And again, more to come, but important first results. Now, when we look at how we're doing, forever we used A1C. Everybody knows A1C. Everybody stresses about their A1C, or at least many people stress about their A1Cs. Over the last 15 years, we've started to use time in range. Many people look at their time in range on their phones and their CGM report outs. And we know it's just, at least to us, a much better metric than A1C, because it shows your highs and lows and also gives you data that you can react to. You know, if you keep dosing insulin, you can get a lower A1C, but you're going to have a lot more lows. So these markers are something that we're looking at to really increase their use. And you'll see on the right side here what we're calling TING, which is time in normal glycemia. So a person without diabetes, their blood sugar for the vast majority of the day is actually not even between 70 and 140. It's between really about 70 and 105 most of the day. But if you look at post-meal spikes, you'll get up into the 130s and 140s, sometimes a little higher if you put a CGM on and don't have diabetes. The time in range for these systems, we're seeing increases in time in range. And we all know that we're going after greater than 70 and 75%, reduced rates of highs and lows. And this is what we're seeing now, that many more people are using technologies. The reason we're looking at this time in normal glycemia, or TING, is really teeing up what is to come. You know, our chief medical officer, who's a legendary diabetes doctor, Dr. Thomas Dane, and I debated this initially because I felt like using this range was too tight for most people to get into. That said, the closed loop systems have allowed us to spend more time there. But what you're going to see from Breakthrough T1D is, as we have these next generation therapies like cells, we want to show that they're even better than what we can do today. So I'm just teeing up that you're going to see us talking about, you know, the use of advanced technologies and how they can help us do better, both on the high and the low side. High causing the risk for type 1 complications, low, obviously hypoglycemia. And if we can do better on both and tighten that range up even more with cells or new drugs, we want to prove the value of them. So just a highlight there. Now, I mentioned SGLT inhibitors. So SGLT inhibitors used in type 2 diabetes, you've probably heard of, for example, Januvia. They cause you to pee out high levels of sugar. The problem with these drugs in our community, in the type 1 community, is there has been a risk, and there have been cases of people getting what's called euglycemic DKA. So that's a fancy way of saying diabetic ketoacidosis at normal blood sugar levels. Many people, and I've talked about this on prior Facebook Lives, associate DKA with high blood sugar and think high blood sugar causes DKA, but it's not the case. High blood sugar doesn't cause DKA. Low insulin causes DKA. And generally, when you have low insulin, generally your blood sugar is high, but not all the time. And I'll give you a for example that's not an SGLT. Some of you know, ran marathons a lot. And when I would finish the marathon, I would often have ketones. And those ketones would many times be at normal blood sugar levels. It's because my insulin levels were low and I was burning so much fuel during those long runs that I would not only burn glucose, I would burn fat and protein. And ketones would build up. Here, in this case, what can happen is people taking these drugs will pee out sugar, in some cases not take their full dose of insulin or not take enough insulin, start burning fat and protein instead of glucose because they don't have enough insulin in their body, and start forming ketones. And then actually, in some cases, they got diabetic ketoacidosis. Very dangerous. And I knew a friend where this happened, and they didn't recognize it initially because their blood sugar was in their 140s. And they ended up in the hospital and very sick. So this is a long wind up to continuous ketone monitoring. We believe, and the data is, these drugs, when used safely, have huge benefits. They can help you lower your A1C with cardiovascular and kidney benefits, but they have this risk. Well, what if you could mitigate that risk? And one of the ways to mitigate that risk would be to monitor ketones continuously. And that's something that's been a priority of Breakthrough T1D, and we see racing towards the market. So there was a lot of discussion at the meeting about this. Abbott Diabetes is working on a continuous ketone glucose sensor that would be the same form factor, the same size and shape as their Libre, which is amazing. And you would get both glucose and ketones. So we see this as a very, very important step, of course, to help reduce the risk of diabetic ketoacidosis and ketosis, but also to allow for the use of SGLT inhibitors in type 1 diabetes. So you see Tandem, Beta Bionics, Sequel, Ipsomed are working with Abbott already to see this system come to the market and be integrated into AID systems, which would be amazing. Really, really cool. I think everybody was worried, would this make my sensor be way bigger and have 2 needles and all this? No, at least what we've seen thus far is it'll be just like the CGM that people are wearing right now. Inhaled insulin. So every year many times I've talked about inhaled insulin. Full disclosure, I've been a long time proponent for my own diabetes of using Afrezza. And I think it's a terrific insulin for many different uses, even while I use a closed loop system for many years, knocking down highs for carby meals, for exercising, but it's been limited to 18 and above. So another report out at ADA was studying Afrezza in kids. Could kids use this drug safely and effectively? And the Inhale 1 trial was reported out, showed youth who used Afrezza liked using it, had no problems, didn't gain weight, and was similar to using their liquid insulin. Their liquid, this is a fast acting, so it's a bolus insulin. So you might say how to do this with a pump. I use it to cover meals sometimes. So this is a big step towards MannKind, the company that makes this insulin, going towards the market, which with what I feel, and again, I'm not a physician, I'm a scientist, but for my diabetes has been an incredibly, incredibly helpful tool. Super fast acting. That's the benefit of this insulin. Peak action is like 15 minutes after you take it. And a lot of the insulin, most of the insulin's out of your system within an hour. So it's just a very, very unique insulin that I think could benefit kids and is a different way to bolus. Go forward. So the next section, we'll talk about medical affairs and advocacy. This is another important part of what we do at Breakthrough T1D. If you go forward, Brian. I see Katie Afrezza with a teen with T1D. Yeah, for sure. Or with maybe it's with a ketone sensor. Yeah, both with a teen could be tremendously helpful. So you see, one of the things, so what is medical affairs? I think everybody understands what advocacy is, but we just brought on Dr. Thomas Dane. He's worked in pediatric diabetes for many, many years now, a legend in the field, ran the biggest pediatric clinic in Germany for many years, and now is on our team. And one of our concerns at Breakthrough T1D is, what if we have breakthrough therapies and your doctor doesn't prescribe them? And this has been a soapbox I've been on with Afrezza, for example. Many doctors don't talk to their patients about Afrezza. Why? And there's a lot of different reasons why that happens. We're trying to break down some of those barriers. One of the most important pieces of having doctors become comfortable with new therapies is having recommendations supported by evidence on how to use a new therapy. So Dr. Dane has been working with an international group to prepare the endocrinology community for this new therapy, a continuous ketone monitor. Very, very important. So let's just fast forward a couple of years and these sensors hit the market. Will your doctor prescribe it? will they understand how to use it? So these guidelines are now charting a trail to be, or a path to be ready for when these new tools come to the market. And this is something that is super important, is evidence-based, and will help us get these breakthroughs out to people sooner, which is really, really important. Go forward. Now, precision medicine. We had this really great session at ADA focused on a disease-delaying drug made by a company called Diomed. And you've probably heard precision medicine thrown out a lot. What does it mean? It's the idea that all drugs don't work for all people. We're all different. We all have different genetic backgrounds. And sometimes what works in one person won't work in another person. And we may even understand why. So the likelihood of getting a drug to the right person increases with our understanding of a disease and allows us to target people who might derive the most benefit. And it also reduces the risk of giving a drug to somebody who won't benefit. Probably the most cutting edge work here is happening in the field of cancer, where cancers are being genotyped. So you can look at the genes within a cancer cell, understand the changes that happen, and certain drugs are targeted to certain changes. And if you have them, you might be a good candidate for a certain chemotherapy, for example. But what about in type 1 diabetes? Well, we have this drug, again, that Diomed's making, and we had a panel where they are doing a trial. It's a certain genotype of people with type 1. It has to do with markers on your cells that play an important role in your immunity and your autoimmunity. And this trial now is targeted to those people, which I think is amazing. So this is something that, again, is coming down the pike. Our team, both our medical affairs, research, and advocacy teams, have been working with the community to start to get ready for, as we start to test people, we understand which drugs are going to work best for them and provide ways, for example, in this population, to delay type 1 from happening, hopefully eventually prevent the progression of type 1 so we can prevent type 1 in people who are at risk, and probably in future medicines restore insulin production. So very, very cool stuff. Great session at the ADA Sci sessions this year. I was in the room, and it was just so interesting to hear the researchers talk about how excited they are about this, because it gives them more information to work with and allows them to get to the people who will likely benefit the most. Now, advocacy. I often say that our mission is accelerating life-changing breakthroughs to cure, prevent, and treat T1D and its complications. And we're not successful unless your life has changed for the better. And you can have the best research idea, become the best new therapy, and what happens if it can't get to the market? And that can happen in a variety of different ways. Part of it is the regulatory processes, and we have amazing work on that front. A big component of this is payment. Can you afford that new therapy? Making sure that these new therapies are covered and accessible to people. I talked about the healthcare professionals. Will they prescribe them? Well, we have a whole team, an amazing team at Breakthrough T1D working on these issues, headed up by Lynn Starr, who herself lives with type 1 diabetes. You see here Mariana Marinak from our team, who also lives with T1D, headed up a panel at ADA talking about the work we do in Washington and around the world with governments and decision makers to help ensure that the voice of people with type 1 and their loved ones is at the table as policy decisions are made. So, for example, we are advocating on Capitol Hill right now for the renewal of what's called the Special Diabetes Program. This is $160 million a year that goes to type 1 diabetes research. Anybody who's wearing an AID system right now, those systems in the US market, where all the pivotal trials were funded by these dollars. Teplizumab, Tzield, that pivotal trial was funded with special diabetes program funding. It is super, super important. If you're an American taxpayer and you want to say on where your tax dollars go, advocate here. So sign up to be a diabetes advocate if you're not one already. This is super important. But this is important. It's not just the federal government. We have FDA. Well, FDA is part of the federal government. It's beyond just federal funding. It's regulatory. It's health policy. It's the U.S. It's the rest of the world. We have type 1 people around the world. So we have our affiliates in Canada, Australia, the UK, Israel, the Netherlands, and we're working across Europe to make sure policies align with what type 1 people need. So I can't stress enough what the work that's happening, Mariana, Lynn, Campbell Hunt, and our team in DC and around the world, working on our community's behalf to drive better policies for our community. So we go forward. So we have an amazing team. So if you're out there and you have a loved one with type 1, or if you're living with type 1, I can't say enough about this team. We had a whole slew of scientists, our policy team, our medical affairs team, our marketing team, you name it, in Chicago, working on your behalf to accelerate life-changing breakthroughs for our community. Curing, preventing, better treating. It takes a village. Breakthrough T1D will do none of those things alone. We need companies involved. We need decision makers aligned with us. We need other funders. It is a team effort. We have an amazing team at Breakthrough T1D, but we're always working around the world to find other stakeholders who will partner with us to accelerate life-changing breakthroughs. So this meeting, I've been to a lot. I've never been as energized as I was when I walked out of that conference and went over to O'Hare Airport to fly home. Cures are coming. Cures are coming. The first scalable cures I expect will be on the market in 27. And the race will then be on to reduce and eliminate the need for immunosuppression. But even that first therapy, I think, is going to help thousands and thousands of people walk away from the daily need for insulin and change their lives. So again, we can't do it without all the folks who are listening in, and all of our supporters and all of our advocates in the United States, around the world. So I am going to, I think, open the floor for questions. I want to see if I missed any. So I see Ilana asking about Turkey and our work around the world. This has been a big focus of ours, Ilana, is to ensure that these breakthroughs reach people no matter where they live as quickly as possible. So we are doing a lot of work to understand how we can mobilize communities and influence policies and fund research that will help your loved ones, whether it's you or a loved one who lives with type 1, as quickly as humanly possible. I've been to Europe, I've been to Asia, Australia, I'll be in Canada this week. We will not rest until everybody with type 1 is cured. And I know that's going to take time. So if you live in Turkey, or if you live in the United States, or if you live in Africa, our goal is to help you. So Ilana, thank you for that question. And I'm very proud of our global work. So Juan, the question on immunosuppression, so yes, so we have a number of shots on goal coming down the pike on immunosuppressants that are safer, more tolerable, and of course, the work on gene editing to hopefully remove the need for immunosuppression. One company that's, I'll give you for example, that's part of our venture fund is a company named Eledon. Eledon is a company that has been working on better immunosuppression for solid organ transplantation. And I think their lead candidate drug is being targeted for kidney transplant recipients. This drug reduces the immunosuppression burden significantly in people who receive a transplant. We have been using this drug in a pilot trial at the University of Chicago. The data is not out there yet, but I can tell you we are very optimistic about this approach. I've met the investigator who's doing the trial. He is very, very positive. And I think over the next year, you're going to see a lot of data. We have a number of companies in our venture fund, the T1D fund, that are working on what we call disease-modifying therapies. And disease-modifying therapies are changing the immunology of type 1. So in some cases, they're being used to slow the progression on, we hope, ultimately stop the progression for people who are at risk. But in this case, we're using a disease-modifying therapy to stop the rejection of a cell transplant. So it's really, really exciting times, Juan, on this front. I'm giddy. And I keep saying, I really feel there's a pathway to me taking my pump off as CEO here. So that's my goal. More to come. Lots of work going on this front. And we're benefiting from a field. By the way, let's just maybe one more point on this topic. One of the things I kind of mentioned how the diabetes community works together to try to move the field forward. In this area, there's a tremendous amount of overlap with other autoimmune disease states. If you have type 1 in your family, it's very, very likely somebody else has a different form of autoimmunity. And the reason is the genetics are such that the bulk of the genetic risk revolve around genes that can control what we call immune regulation. How your immune system attacks things that are bad, but in some cases, an autoimmunity gets out of kilter. There's actually even overlap with cancer because cancer and autoimmunity are kind of mirror images of one another. Autoimmunity, your immune system kills things it shouldn't. Cancer, it doesn't kill things that it should. There's a lack of balance in our immune system. So we're doing so much work on this front, and we're working with other fields like cancer and other autoimmune diseases. So Juan, keep your eyes open here. You're going to see a lot of progress in the coming years. And like I mentioned, Diomed, for example, they're currently in new onset diabetes, but using precision approaches. So Don, you're asking about the SANA cells. They did not talk about that. So they did not give dates on in their clinic. So they have this one person in the trial. What's next? They did not give updates on that front. Let me see if there's other questions. We have a few more minutes here. I'm happy to stay. LinkedIn, hoping for a cure. We are all hoping for a cure, and it's more than hope. We are working aggressively towards cures. And by the way, I'll just point out, people often say hoping for a cure, I want a cure. I think the very important thing that our team thinks about is there is going to be no singular cure, probably until there's a vaccine for type 1 where we can stop type 1 in its tracks. But what you'll see in our work at Breakthrough T1D is we're working with well over a dozen companies working on curative approaches, as well as dozens of research investigators around the world. There are going to be multiple cures for type 1. The first cure, let's say Zymacel is the first curative scalable therapy. I mean, we do have another curative therapy that is already FDA approved. It's a donor-derived islet therapy. It's a narrow group of people. Even Zymacel will be a relatively narrow group of people. And that's going to be V1, what I would call V1, what we would call the kind of Gen 1 of a cell therapy. But there's going to be next generations. And then there's going to be other companies like Cernova or Novacell or Zugu. We have a variety of different companies working on different ways to get it. Just like many of us use different types of closed loop systems. There's no singular artificial pancreas. So I think your point, of course, we want a cure, but we really want cures plurally for multiple shots on goal, multiple people, and that's what we're going after. Dual hormone pumps, Juan, I don't have a great update there. I know Beta Bionics continues to press forward. Our focus has been both on glucagon and on amylin as a second hormone that could be ideally co-formulated with insulin and have GLP-like benefits. The goal there, one of our focuses in our Improving Lives portfolio, is to reduce the bolus burden with closed loop systems. And that is an area of focus that I think is better, will more likely happen, not with glucagon, but with a GLP or an amylin type of approach. So more to come on that front. Don, you're asking about clinical trials. I can't stress enough that clinical trial participation is one of the most important things you can do to move this science along. So hopefully our team will put up on our website, we have a very easy to use tool where you can see if you or a loved one can participate in a clinical trial. There'll be more and more trials recruiting for all of these exciting new therapies, and you can participate. Way back when my family got involved, for example, we have 2 type 1s in the family. We participated in early genetics research into what causes type 1, closed loop trials, you name it. So there's a lot to do on clinical trials. So hopefully the team can put the link in there. There we go. So find a trial. It's super easy to navigate. You type in your details out if you can travel, and you'll get a readout on. And it's a great. You should learn. You should be aware. Smart insulin. I'm trying to think of what I can say publicly here. So I guess and I don't mean to be coy, but we do have hope that there is progress being made on smart insulin. There are a number of companies who have been working on smart insulin. For example, Eli Lilly acquired a technology that we funded at the foundation and within our fund called Protomer. That is moving along. So smart insulins, for folks who don't know, these would be insulins kind of really, I don't know, call them designer insulins that would only work when your body needed the insulin. So that would be glucose, the term we often use is glucose responsive insulin, which is really, really promising alternative approach, like the world's best treatment. If you could give insulin and you didn't get low, you could give more insulin and knock down the highs. That's a very complicated biochemistry problem, but that's something that we continue to be interested in. All right, let me see. I see the question about autism and type 1, and is there a genetic link? So unfortunately in my job, I do know a number of people who have children or loved ones with autism and type 1 diabetes. We all know that autism's been on the rise for a number of years now. Back before I came to Breakthrough T1D, I actually used to teach genetics, and I try to keep up on what's going on, particularly with type 1 genetics. I am not aware of a connection between autism and type 1 diabetes. I see your point about inflammation, and we know there's many diseases are rooted in abnormal inflammation. So Susan, I wish I had a better answer. I'll ask the team about that, and if you follow up with us, I'll see if they know more than I do, but I have not seen a link. So let me say, when could VX880 hit the market? The trial will be fully enrolled soon, which means it'll be over next year, Juan, which means late 26, early 27 is kind of where everybody's betting, which is pretty amazing. All right. Juan, you're my best question guy. I appreciate it. So crossover between medical affairs to widen the availability of tech. Now, absolutely, Katie. We work in incredible tight concert. Lynn Starr, who heads up our GR division, and Thomas and Sanjay and myself, every week, almost every day, we're talking about how to tackle these problems, what's needed, and the entire teams. So yes, huge amount of work on synchronizing to make sure we get these things out to people sooner. The last thing, it kills me. I go back, I hearken back to the battle that we fought for Medicare coverage of CGM. And it was one of the really proud moments for me working with our DC team, which was a super tight collaboration between the research folks and the advocacy folks to fight for the Medicare population to have access for CGM, which was really delayed over 5 years versus private insurance, which was a travesty. So we fought that battle. It wasn't just us, but we played a very important role. I was in the room there, and people benefited from that. So, Katie, I appreciate that question because it's something that we are always looking at. I see the question about Alzheimer's and type 1. There has been talk about Alzheimer's being type 3 diabetes. The evidence there, Melissa, I think the team and I would say is still, I don't know, iffy is the right term, but it's not as solid as it needs to be. But these are pathways that, when we fund research, the origins of type 1, what triggers it, we know there's a genetic risk in our families, but it's more than just genetics. There's an environmental trigger as well. If we can unwind those mysteries, and there's been an amazing work, that's another piece of the special diabetes program funding a trial called TEDDY, and they talked about that study, TEDDY, at the ADA sessions. The largest data set on the drivers of type 1 in the world right now. What is causing type 1? I firmly believe is going to come out of that data set. It's super complicated. And then the links to other diseases. And nobody's asked about AI, but we're doing a lot of work on leveraging AI to get at these super data intensive problems. How can we understand the link between genetics and the environment and what triggers type 1? It's a really complicated problem that I think AI will help us sort out. So, yeah, Nicole, I see your, was it pneumonia that triggered your type 1? The other piece that we've learned a lot about is that the illness that often is associated with your diagnosis is probably not what caused your type 1, because another TEDDY and another study, TrialNet, has really looked at when you get the markers for type 1 is often much earlier than when your type 1 shows symptomatically. And that's been another piece that was talked a lot about at this meeting, the staging of type 1 diabetes. So what we're really trying to understand is what's happening when your immune system gets triggered. So for example, I was diagnosed at 13, but based upon the data, I likely had diabetes for 8 to 10 years before I was symptomatic. The bulk of kids in studies have the markers for type 1 before, and often many years before they have symptoms. So I can't say for sure pneumonia didn't cause your type 1, but it was probably something before that pneumonia, Nicole, that did. All right, I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, so maybe one more question. Let me see. If there's anything else, let's see. I don't think so. So maybe I'll wrap here and just say, again, thank you. If you're not involved, get involved. I can't stress enough that now is the time. The push is happening. We are going to cure this disease. I truly believe, I've said to our board that I want to be the CEO who takes off his pump and goes and works on something else. And I believe it's possible. So you can do a walk, you can become an advocate, you can participate in a clinical trial. There's so many different ways to get involved. Do it. Why not? It's our disease. Let's fix it. So Mark Atkinson is on my screen right now. I just got a shout out to the scientific community. Mark is saying here that his first scientific meeting in diabetes was 40 years ago. I mean, that is a level of commitment. And Mark Atkinson, Dr. Atkinson, has uncovered so much of our understanding of type 1. So those mysteries that we were talking about here, there are less mysteries because of the work of Mark, his team, and so many amazing scientists around the world. So this, again, takes a village, and I can't thank everybody enough who does lean in for what you do. And if you don't, it's never too late. So thanks, everybody. I'll be back. Don't hesitate to be in touch on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it, or email me. Happy to answer a question if you forgot this evening. Thanks, everybody.